They're not talking about the best of them. They're just talking about the rest of them. Not the worst parts, but the best parts. This is the best of the rest.
Hello and welcome to Best of the Rest, a show where we take a second look at superhero movies with bad reputations and talk about what they got right. My name is Chris Logan.
I'm Andrew Williams.
And today we are talking Fantastic Four, specifically the 2005 version, though I'm sure at some point we will talk about the other. Andrew, you excited for this one?
I am. I was going to mention this to you earlier, but I figured I'd say it. It's like, I don't actually know if I've ever watched this movie start to finish before.
You know, same. I'm familiar with it. I knew the cast, I knew scenes, but this was probably the first time prepping for this where I watched beginning to end.
It definitely, there were scenes that definitely I was like, I've seen this before. And like when I got to like the climax and things were taking place, some of it definitely was like ringing like familiar, but I genuinely, some of it was like, I don't remember any of this. So from that perspective already, it was interesting to go back and watch it in its entirety. I mean, 16 years later, and just kind of see how it stacks up to some of the more modern stuff.
Yeah, mostly I just knew about kind of the reputation that this movie had, which isn't great, which is why we're talking about it. Yeah. But this is going to be a positive conversation about the movie. I want to look at what this movie does right. Now, Andrew, you are, a comic book expert. I don't know what title you want to use, but you have this encyclopedic knowledge of all things comic books and you have some insane recall. So let me tell you everything I know about the Fantastic Four going into this. Sure. And you can maybe fill in the rest here. So let's see. Fantastic Four. I know that they're a family. I know in the comic book world, they are very important. They're Marvel's first family, kind of the Marvel Renaissance that produced all the characters we know and love. They were kind of the first out of that batch. I know Doctor Doom is from another country. And I'm starting to run out of stuff I know about the Fantastic Four. That's about the basics.
There are four of them.
Okay, I did know that.
No, the Fantastic Four they're one of the most important comics for Marvel specifically, but probably just in general. That run by Lee and Kirby of Fantastic Four, you can actually see like a change in comics in real time.
Is that the initial run? Is that?
Yeah, the initial run from Fantastic Four 1 to, I forget when they end, but it's several years, and it's probably their longest consistent collaboration, but it's arguably one of the most important Fantastic Four one of the most important Marvel comics, probably until you get to Claremont's X-Men.
Okay.
In the late 70s into the 80s.
Now that's in comic books. In greater pop culture and movies, there may be B-list at best, at least up until 2005. I mean, there wasn't any high profile adaptation, no other movies. There was a short-lived cartoon I believe,
for a little while, but the Fantastic Four were not. There's actually a lot of parallels, I think, between this and like Green Lantern, where I think you've got something that's got this kind of situational awareness almost, but when it comes to like diving deeper into it, people just didn't know or didn't even care. The Fantastic Four they're that group that like about. They all wear blue jumpsuits and they have the number 4 on them, and one of them's made of rock. Like that's kind of everybody knows that, but that's really it. They've all got there.
Instantly identifiable superpowers. Stretchy guy, you know the powers.
Yeah.
So they got that going for him. But let's set the stage a little bit. This releases in the summer, July 8th, 2005. So what's going on in 2005 in the world of comic book movies? It's definitely the beginning of what I refer to as a superhero renaissance at the box office, right?
Right. We're kind of in between. We're post X-Men and Spider-Man at this point, but
which is where it starts.
We're pre MCU,
correct?
So we're pretty much smack dab in the middle of that. 2005 does bring a couple of other adaptations. The most notable of which is probably Batman Begins.
I've heard of that one. I'm familiar with that movie.
It's a little indie flick. You maybe a little smaller one. Obviously, that year we also had Elektra, which was a follow-up / spinoff of Ben Affleck's Daredevil.
Right, of course.
We also had Keanu Reeves' Constantine. Sin City releases that year as well. And then I think we actually in the fall get A History of Violence, which is one of those it's based off a graphic novel, but if you didn't tell anyone, they wouldn't know.
Most people don't think of it as a comic
no
movie.
No one views A History of Violence as a comic book movie. But
it's definitely this fun era in Hollywood where they're kind of throwing everything against the wall. They're buying up a lot of these movies were in development hell for years.
Oh yeah, and this one is no exception.
And all of a sudden, comic book superhero movies are hot, so they want to finally get the ball rolling, get them produced, get them out the door. I love this era because 2012, everything changes. That's when Avengers comes out, and then everything is about creating a shared universe, not just superhero movies, but Warner Brothers does their monsters. Universal tried to revive the Universal monsters. Everything's trying to build, copy that model. But this is still the standard Hollywood model where all you're trying to do is get to a sequel, get number 2, get number 3.
Make money.
Fox made this movie. They hit big with X-Men. Then they do Daredevil. They do Punisher. They do this movie, Fantastic Four. And none of those are attempts to share a universe. They could have built their own MCU if that's what they wanted, but nobody was thinking that way. They just want a bunch of different franchises. So Fantastic Four comes out. It's a hit, over 300 million at the box office. $100 million budget, which by today's superhero movies might seem a little quaint, but they invested in this, a bit of money behind it. Critics don't love it. We got 27% on Rotten Tomatoes. And that's kind of all I ever heard about this movie was that it's not good. It's goofy. Honestly, I'm not sure I've ever heard a single positive thing about this movie before our conversation, where hopefully we're going to say a lot of positive things about it. What's kind of your take? What does the public, what does the internet think of this movie?
Well, it's interesting because for that legacy, it does warrant a sequel. And I'm sure we'll talk about that sequel down the line. But it is interesting. Like you said, you mentioned it's a $100 million budget, and it makes $333.5 million, which is actually not that much less than Batman Begins, which cost more to make.
Right.
So it's something that, compared to something like Elektra, which I don't think was financially successful whatsoever, you've got an audience that did go and see this and then warranted a sequel, which is interesting.
I mean, there's a reason they made so many superhero movies. That's what people wanted to go see. It was the hot new thing.
People did see them, and this one's no exception. But the legacy, obviously, when after the sequel, they announced they weren't moving forward with more. I don't think anyone was sad about that.
No.
This is an interesting movie to me, too, just because of that legacy, too, of just like how long it takes to get made. Because this isn't like Green Lantern, where like you've got a start and stop of like 6 different versions. The version of this movie that comes to the screen is legit in development for like 10 years. But the legacy, it's kind of like Green Lantern, overall just seen as a missed opportunity.
Yeah. And today, it's almost forgotten about. I really don't even care about this movie, good or bad, at all.
I think the Trank movie supplanted most people's image of the Fantastic Four for the most part.
Oh, right. Yeah.
That a different conversation for a different day. But I think that.
Have you watched that one? Have you seen that one?
I feel like I must have, but it's completely gone.
I haven't sat down and watched it, but that one, we'll get to it. I'm sure we'll talk about that.
I'm sure we will. But
let's talk about this one here. Let's go through some of the casting choices they made, and in the spirit of being positive, let's start with this. Who is your MVP of this movie? And what I mean by that is sometimes a character, an actor is cast and they really elevate a character. They elevate the movie. They take it to the next level, even if not everything is working in that movie. Maybe this one actor is raising it. Now, we talked about Green Lantern already, and we were, it was Mark Strong all the way, right? Your guy. I'm curious if we're going to have the same pick this time. I've got my pick, but I want to hear yours first.
I think there are 2 people that elevate the movie.
You've got to pick one. Who's Andrew
my question? MVP? I'm making a point. Calm down.
Okay.
I don't think there's anybody that elevates this movie to the level that Mark Strong elevates Green Lantern.
That's a high bar.
It is, but there are a couple of people that I think are stepping up to the plate. I will go with my one though, and I don't think it's the one that people might expect.
Well, let's hear it. Who's your one?
I'm going with Michael Chiklis as Ben Grimm for my MVP of this movie.
I thought that might be your answer. It's a good pick. Tell me why you think he elevates the movie.
First and foremost, he's having to act 2/3 of this movie in prosthetics, which is something I actually appreciate, is that they went prosthetic for him versus trying to do CGI. Because in 2005, that technology just wouldn't.
That was the right move for sure.
There's definitely moments with everybody else where you can tell that they're stretching it a bit, pun intended. But with him making it prosthetic, he ends up looking kind of the best of all of them by the fact that his powers are just being made of rocks, and he's the one that looks the best.
He can interact with the environment and touch things. People can touch him. It would have looked off
very
otherwise.
Real. But his performance, I think, finds that right balance. Like you said, you talk about whether it all works or not. There are things that definitely work better than other things, but I think his performance finds that balance of I'm still Ben Grimm, but I'm stuck in this awful situation. And I think he brings a lot to the movie. I think he clearly, dials into it. I like the general banter he has with Reed as well, especially before he turns into the Thing, like when they're actually just like friends.
Yeah, they sell that. There's good chemistry there.
There's a good chemistry there. And but yeah, I think he brings a lot to it.
He had a tough job, not just because he's acting through prosthetics and everything, but the tone of this movie, I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about it.
Yeah.
Let's call it lighthearted, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But the Thing has some emotional moments. I mean,
yes.
I at least know from the comics, this character in general, he's a bit of a tragic character. As goofy and hokey as some of his catchphrases are. He's the only one that can't hide his powers or pass as a normal person. He's looked at as a monster, and this movie touches on it. It doesn't
a little bit
get too deep, but it's definitely there. So he's gonna kind of ride this balance of being in this lighthearted movie, but conveying some of the emotional depths that a lot of other characters don't have to. So yeah, props to him.
He's got the hardest job for sure. He's got the hardest job of, like I said, and then you take that balance of trying to do all of that with then adding the fact that he's in prosthetics the whole time. So it's a very difficult process. And I think
prosthetics too, because those are like his eyes. And there's obviously some makeup around the eyes, but the transition to the rock, whatever kind of foam or whatever they used, it's really well done. I like to look good.
Generally speaking, I don't think it looks horrendously dated either. Obviously nowadays you would do it very differently. But it doesn't, like, if you told me those prosthetics were 16 years old, I probably wouldn't think that.
Sure. It's a step above Arrested Development. I think they got a little bit better prosthetics than they
just a skosh there. Just a little bit.
But no, today I'm not sure about the other Fantastic Four movie. I assume they went CG.
He's CG in that. I know enough to know he's CG in that one.
Okay. Now I think that's the right move today. If you make it, let's jump all the way to 2021. We've got, Thanos. I mean, we've got believable CG characters. This role of the Thing basically becomes a voice role at that point. Once he transitions, you're just providing your voice, maybe some mocap on set, but he's got to do it all. So props to Michael Chiklis there.
Well, and this was additionally too, this was kind of against the grain for him too, because the biggest thing he's known for at this period in time is probably the Shield.
The Shield, yeah, and this casting is interesting.
He's not family friendly on the Shield.
No. I think he's cast because he's a bigger guy. The voice obviously matters a lot for being the Thing. This casting up and down the movie is interesting because
extremely,
for the most part, it's very 2005. They're either capturing who's hot at the time or who's a rising star. I want to get to my MVP. So I had a different pick. If it's not the Thing, you can probably guess who I'm going to say.
Probably, yes.
Chris Evans as Johnny Storm is just so much fun. He's having a great time, which I think is perfect. I think he gets the tone that the movie's going for. He's dialed in. Now, we know this guy for all kinds of stuff, but in 2005, I was looking at his filmography. What I would have known him from is not another teen movie.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a guilty pleasure of mine. I'm not even guilty about it. It's a fun movie. He's got some memorable scenes. I didn't know the name Chris Evans for sure in 2005. He would have been, that guy from Not Another Teen Movie. But I think he's great. He's hamming it up. He's chewing the scenery. I think
he is.
It works. It's hilarious. I jotted down. So after they get the powers, they're going to jump ahead a little bit. The nurse is checking him out. He's got a temperature. And there's so many just bad puns. And I mean that in a loving way. It all works.
He's very good. And he was the other one. Like of the two, he was the other one.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think kind of like Green Lantern, I don't think there's anybody that's badly cast in this movie, but those
Nobody's
two are
bringing it
definitely the
down.
ones. Those two are definitely the ones that are bringing it up for me.
Yeah, that line with the nurse, she says, "You're hot." Well, I think so are you, and I'm not afraid to cry. And what the hell is that? It was awesome.
There's a bit where he's got one of those like popcorn things you put on the oven, like you put on the stove.
Yeah, like a Jiffy Pop.
He's just popping it in his hand, and
they have just so much fun with their powers.
It's just a quick little gag. Like he's literally like walking to the TV, and he's just got this popcorn in his hand, and it's popping, and it's like if you're not even paying attention, you won't even notice that. And those are moments where like some effort was clearly put into this, as far as trying to like show the kind of casual use of the powers, no less.
If you had these powers, what is the stupid fun stuff you would do? They have a lot of fun with that. Most of it is very successful.
Yeah,
I love this bit with the thing where he walks into the bar and the jukebox is skipping because it's apparently playing CDs or records. With every step, the jukebox is, and that's just I would never would have thought of that, but it's very cool. It works for the character, it draws attention to him. If there was a super heavy guy walking on a wooden floor in the jukebox,
that's gonna knock it up. So
there's a lot of thought put into this movie. I talked a little bit about how this cast is like who's hot in 2005. I think at the top of that list is casting Jessica Alba as Sue Storm, which I'm not gonna. She's fine. She's just good in the movie. But up until this point, she's definitely like a rising star. Idle Hand, something that another guilty pleasure of mine, I guess. She's hot off of Honey, which I've never seen. It was a moderate hit. I think that's kind of her breakthrough.
Dark Angel, I think, was the big. She was on that TV show, Dark Angel. That was TV. That was a TV show she was on for a long time, and I think that's actually where the star is built. At least as far as transitioning her to film.
She gets this and Sin City, which come out the same year.
Yeah. And this is, I wouldn't say Jessica Alba probably would have been my first choice. I can't remember some of the other ones I read. I think like Rachel McAdams was one of them and a couple of others. But she's it's a very 2005 choice. But she's perfectly good in this role. Like I said, I don't know if she's bringing it to the level that Chiklis and Evans are, but perfectly good.
Now, looking at this cast, I didn't recognize who was playing Reed Richards. And then I look up his filmography and it did not help. Guy, I think, I don't know. Wikipedia tells me he was in Titanic. He was in Black Hawk Down, King Arthur shortly before this. I never saw that one. But even after this movie, nothing I really recognize in this guy. Very interesting choice for essentially your lead of the movie. It's an ensemble cast, but Reed Richards is the leader. It's an important role.
He's the face of this team.
I'm scared to even try to pronounce his name. Ioan Gruffudd.
I think it's just Ioan Gruffudd.
Ian. I've never.
I don't know. I'm not going to assume, but when I always overdo things like that, and then it turns out it's just something like that. But he's definitely. I feel like you can say he's a relative unknown for this. Like you said, you look at the stuff he was in, and he's been in some things. The Black Hawk Down was not a nothing movie. Titanic certainly wasn't either, but I don't remember, nobody saw Titanic and left that movie going, wow, did you see Gruffudd in that movie? Like, wow, that wasn't his movie. And Black Hawk Down was very similar, but it is an interesting decision to go that way because like you hear fan castings and stuff like that, but like, I can't even imagine who would have been your Reed Richards fan casting in 2005.
In 2005, I have no idea.
Like, is it like George Clooney, maybe? Like, I don't know. Like, I don't
kind of the gray. He would be the opposite. Most actors, you've got to add the gray. You would need to add the color to have the gray highlights. Yeah. But I got to think maybe his look is a big part of why he was cast. Not that he's a bad actor. He does a good job. But he's got the look. He looks like comic book Reed Richards when you push his hair back, and then they give him the gray once they get the powers and stuff. So yeah, good casting there. Julian McMahon, apparently on Nip Tuck. I know that was a big show. It was
that was clearly his thing. That was the big thing he was known for. I actually think he's a pretty great choice overall. I think the script lets him down a little bit as far as like giving him like solid things to kind of work with. But generally speaking, I think his casting is actually pretty great.
You want someone who looks sinister as soon as you look at him, as soon as they say something. I mean, subtle this movie is not.
No.
The opening scene, they're walking into his office building. He's got a giant statue of himself. His name is Victor Von Doom. And man, I wonder if he's going to be the bad guy, right? So you want someone that as soon as they start talking or they're on screen, you want to know that they're a bad guy. And I think he's dialed in that regard.
And it's like I said, one thing I did read that was interesting is apparently Nicolas Cage was cast as Von Doom in this movie and then dropped out.
I wish that would have come to fruition.
And I'm just curious, what else was Nicolas Cage doing in 2005 that he didn't want to do Fantastic Four?
He doesn't seem to say no to anything. I think
nowadays, but like
I don't think he has an agent. I think you just shoot an email and the auto response is yes, and then he shows up on set, right?
Just shoot him his $20 and a handshake, and he's all in for you. But
I think he would bring the right energy, though, over the top. Somewhat cheesy.
He would have been very different than McMahon, to be fair. Yes. Like he would have obviously been leaning a lot more into like the comic booky side of it. But
which I think would have worked for the tone of this movie and what they were going for.
Because and I will say that I think McMahon at times almost feels like he's in a different movie because he's being very sinister sometimes, being very playing it straight in a movie that's by and large not.
Yeah, it's not until he gets the suit and prosthetics that he kind of starts hamming it up and getting a little bit bigger with the performance.
But I think his casting is a good choice. I don't think, like I said, this is another movie where I think most of the issues are just coming down to script. The cast is all varying levels from perfectly good to, in the case of some of them, great.
I don't want to jump ahead too much with my thoughts on the movie, but I'm going to be honest with you. I really liked this movie. I had a good time, and maybe I
had a perfectly enjoyable time watching this.
It's years later. There's no stakes. I'm just watching it on Disney Plus. I'm not, paying for this movie or buying it, going to the theaters. I thought it was a lot of fun. I think it worked for what it's going for. I don't think it deserves the 27% on Rotten Tomatoes. If I was a professional critic and I had to just give it a very basic recommend or don't recommend, I'm recommending the movie.
Yeah, and it's interesting reading about how difficult it was to get it to screen. I think that was much like there's just that long history of Green Lantern. Fantastic Four is very similar. We're just, that there's the Roger Corman one from the mid-90s, which was supposedly made just to keep the rights. That's the rumor of that film pretty much.
Yeah.
Start to finish is that movie was exclusively produced on like a micro budget just so that studio could maintain the rights. And I don't think that's been a debunked story. I think that's still generally.
I think it's pretty accepted. Yes,
yeah, that's what happened. But then that was 94. Like Michael France, who is one of the co-writers in the film, he comes on to write this in 1995. So it's the same writer credited on the final film that starts writing it 10 years previously. And at that time, I think Chris Columbus was going to direct it. Then at that point, directors come and go. You get Peter Siegel, Sam Wiseman, Peyton Reed, who does notably Bring It On and then the Ant-Man movies. He comes on for a brief period of time. Mark Frost co-writes it. I don't know if you're familiar with Mark Frost.
Twin Peaks frame is what
he co-created Twin Peaks.
Yeah.
Which again, so like you're looking at I still kind of am blown away by that. But and then ultimately I think Tim Story comes on board. And I think Tim Story is another guy who was a studio guy. I think he had just done a movie for them called Taxi. I think that was the Jimmy Fallon.
Yeah, Jimmy Fallon. Vehicle. He did I believe Barbershop, the first Barbershop.
Yeah,
looking at it. So yeah,
I think the studio was a fan of what he did with those movies. I think they were moderate successes, and so they were, I think, keen to bring him in. I think Columbus is still on as a producer, but no, like I said, a long path to film, to cameras rolling, and it's not like I said, it's not like Green Lantern where there's a bunch of different versions. This is really, it seems like, generally one movie that just percolates for a decade. And you obviously have to assume that it's the success of X-Men and Spider-Man that tell them, well, and even then I think for Fantastic Four, it's really got to be the success of Spider-Man. I think that's got to be the one that tells you, hey, the more family friendly, less black leather approach works, because they do get blue costumes in this.
They do. They look great. I think the superhero renaissance we've been alluding to, the thing that starts with X-Men in 2000, Spider-Man is 01, I think, right after that, right?
I think it's 02.
02, but back to back, essentially, superhero hits that we're still in the period of the superhero. But I think everything, there's kind of like two branches. There's the X-Men approach, which is ground them in reality as much as you can. And then there's a Spider-Man approach, which is where you embrace the comic book and the fun and the colorful, and you don't worry about real world physics or forcing them into Batman Begins, which is in the X-Men camp, where it's like, what if Batman was in real life? Then you got Fantastic Four or Daredevil, which I think is a little bit more Spider-Man and having fun with it. Yeah. What would you say is your favorite scene in the movie? What works? What do you think is let's say the high point of the movie? Let's start there.
Well, one thing I will say about this movie that I like right off the bat is this is another movie where we're like deep end, no floaties. We're in space getting their powers like 15 minutes into this.
Not afraid to get weird with it.
There is no, and I, if anything, I loved that about it. Like, it's not Green Lantern level where the exposition in the first 30 seconds is, emerald energy of will. But this is, I mean, like I said, we're in space getting powers, dealing with the outcomes of that 15 minutes in. So we don't waste any time.
These characters have a history. You can tell by how they talk to each other, but we didn't see all that. We're after all that. So we learned about it through dialogue, through character moments. And I think it was a smart choice.
I think it is. I mean, we've got all four. We've got the Fantastic Four and Dr. Doom on the space station less than 10 minutes in, I think. And I think that's, and I appreciate, I will always appreciate a movie that is like, you know what? The story is not the origin. The story is the team. And that's clearly what this movie airs on the side of. Now, like you said, you can go further into that all you want, but it clearly was like, get that out of the way. Let's get to the team.
And that was a cool scene. I like the comet. It's a comet, right? Kind of taking over the space
solar
station.
Waves or whatever. Yeah,
it hits them with
cosmic radiation.
Yeah, whatever, something that gives them superpowers, and they you kind of get like a preview of what their powers are going to be, right? In the special effects, you
like Reed gets hit and he all stretches out, and Sue turns invisible, and Johnny looks like he's on fire, and
exactly,
Ben has like the rock thing. Cool. Yeah.
Oh man, what if they cast the Rock as the thing? How fun would that be? That
just seems a little too on the nose. Well, I'm trying to think. Like I like you said though, like by and large, I enjoyed watching this. This is not a movie that I think is deserving of its history. I like a lot of the scenes with Johnny. When he started snowboarding, for some reason, the idea of a snowboarding skiing scene in this movie felt extremely 2000s to me as well. Just
I think Sum 41 hits on the soundtrack.
Yeah, like this. Too, that's this so soundtrack too. Like this soundtrack
his first appearance is he's on a motorcycle. He's making out with a girl in a convertible, and Velvet Revolver is blasting, and it's like, man, this is so 2005. You're right.
I always told myself, I'm like, I don't feel like you can identify things like by music as well as you can in like the 90s, the 80s. This movie definitely dates itself with the music that it has. Like, not in a bad way, but like you can definitely tell that like we're in the mid 2000s with this movie just from the song choices.
A period of time that we don't normally think of as having a culture. We know 90s is like grunge and flannel, and 80s is new wave and big hairdos. And this movie captures early.
It kind of does. 2000s. And that's actually like kind of impressive. Like far more than something like say Spider-Man or Spider-Man 2 does.
For sure. And, I mean, this movie made me feel nostalgic for 15 years ago.
Yeah, in a way. I like the scenes with Johnny a lot. Like that scene where he just pops the popcorn in his hand. I have no idea why that sticks in my head so much, but it does. Just because I think it's such a subtle use of doing something like that. The moment where Ben decides he has to go back to being the Thing doesn't land entirely for me, but I think Chickless sells it really well. As far as
I thought that was interesting. So all right. So what happens is, he's the Thing. He's tormented by looking different. He wants to,
and he wants to be normal again.
Human. And it happens. He gets it, and he decides to go back to being the Thing. And when it first happens, I'm thinking, this destroys the character. He can now go back and forth. He doesn't have that torment. But then they kind of resolve the whole arc, and he's
I won't necessarily say the resolution is perfect. And like by introducing the concept that it can be done seemingly, you kind of have to then introduce the concept that he's okay with it.
He's okay. Yeah, he's going to choose.
Otherwise, why wouldn't you just take him back? But Chickless sells most of what happens in this movie really well. And there's scenes with him that I like a lot. The scenes with Johnny I like a lot. Obviously, the scene on the bridge where they're doing their powers for the first time.
That's my favorite scene in the movie.
I think that's just pure classic superhero stuff. Just you've got all of them experimenting with their powers. You've got all of them kind of doing their thing.
Here's why I love that scene specifically for the Fantastic Four, which I'm not an expert, but I've got a general understanding of them. You get the entire Fantastic Four experience in one scene. At the beginning of that scene, the public is scared of the Thing, and he's a monster. And then through their heroics, they become celebrities. They jam everything into it. It's a very practical effects scene. That's where I think a lot of the budget went. You've got the fire truck hanging over the edge, and they each use their powers, the learning how to use their powers, how to work as a team. They go from being feared to being celebrities in the end, which is a big part of Fantastic Four, right? So kind of like the celebrities.
They're not. There's no secret identities with the Fantastic Four.
And then out of nowhere, Debbie shows up at the end for some reason to take off her ring
and give it back.
So they're really getting everything into it. In that moment, that's my favorite moment for the Thing. She leaves it on the ground and he can't pick it up with his hand. And dude, that works. It was effective.
It does. I said, Chickless sells it. It's a cool scene, and I think it's a very effective scene. Whereas you could say that the unveiling scene of something like Green Lantern is too small scale. This has that proper feeling of scale to me. Like, this feels like we're on a bridge. We're in New York City. It's very public, and there's stuff that feels like it's at stake. And they're just, like you said, you get a bigger sense of scope. Not the world, but you get the sense that more than 15 people are seeing this happen.
Yeah. They're not saving the world, but it's very public.
And then you kind of see beyond that the effects of it. It's not just, like a throwaway line on television or something. You see that celebrity takes off, and you see that
and they all deal with it differently.
Like, obviously Johnny loves it.
He's embracing it. Yeah.
He's all about it. And Ben is obviously hating it because he feels like everybody's really kind of making fun of him. Whereas Reed and Sue were more dedicated to fixing Ben. And meanwhile, in the back of all of it, you've got Doom slowly coming undone. Not slowly necessarily, but like, obviously
compared to the other characters that happen slowly, they kind of instantly get their powers just about.
Yeah, he's weird, like, his is a very strange, like, descent of, like, I'm slowly succumbing to what's happening to me. And maybe that's because he was more protected than them, so it took a longer time. I'm not sure, but yeah. And so that scene on the bridge, though, I think we're in agreement there. I think that's the pinnacle of the movie. Not that the rest of the movie is bad by any means, but that really, to me, is everything. It's like you said, it's all of them in a single place.
Yes. What's really smart about it is where it's placed in the movie, because they get their powers. Then we get this big scene of them using the powers. And then we get, after that, them kind of experimenting and learning what their powers are, where traditionally that would come first. And it would be a very slow first act where they're just kind of getting used to their powers and learning how to use them and what they can do. But it's smart to put that action scene so early to kind of tide us over. And then we can get into the fun montage of them, quarantined in the building. Is funny to hear him use that term in this movie. Quarantined in the building.
Just anytime they said quarantine, I was just like, you guys have no idea.
Watching any movie, anytime there's a crowd scene, I'm like, what are you guys doing?
What are you doing? None of you have masks on. But no, it's very effective. This is sort of related, but the cover of X-Men #1, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's the very first issue of X-Men. But it's notable because it has all 5 of the X-Men using their powers together against Magneto.
Yeah.
And it's the first time that it ever really been done that all the members of a team use their powers at once. And that came to mind when I was watching this scene, because it really is just like a perfect set piece to set up everybody, introduce everybody, give everybody something to do that makes sense. Like, obviously Johnny's like, oh, well, if this thing's exploding, I can protect this person because it's not going to hurt me. Whereas Ben's got the brute strength to pick up the truck. Reed can obviously reach and catch people. Sue doing the invisibility and the
problem
shields.
Can only this character solve?
Right. Like, it was like, let's create an actual. It very much felt like we're gonna solve the problem backwards rather than trying to like create something and then logic your way out of it. It very much was like, here's what we have. Let's work our way backwards to what can they do. It's very interesting to me how the scene starts. Because it starts with Ben kind of sitting on the bridge by himself, kind of racked with this kind of torment that, he's just been dumped by his fiance. The scene where she runs outside, like wearing her lingerie or whatever that was, felt very strange to me. Like, you're just going to run outside wearing that? It's a little strange.
Yeah.
It definitely, I was like, you put a jacket on or something. But so Ben's up there by himself, like, and a bird gets on him and, really piling it on. And then this guy shows up. Seemingly about to commit suicide. And Ben ends up like, obviously the guy stops because he sees Ben and he's like, oh, Jesus. And Ben ends up saving him because the guy backs up and falls onto the bridge in front of traffic. And that's another scene that I think is really good for Chickless, just because, again, you're seeing that despite the torment that he's in, despite the things that he is still personally going through, his mind is still, oh, well, I have to save this guy. Despite everything.
He's a hero, not because he has these powers, but because he's a good person and he does the right thing.
Mm-hmm. And that's
just before the bridge scene is the scene where Bryn goes to see his wife.
Right.
And once she sees him, she screams and freaks out. And it's, it's very much kind of a downer moment. The movie gets a little bit real, right? But right after this, you've got him on the bridge and then the guy, and then we're right back into the fun tone of the movie. It definitely keeps it light, keeps it moving.
It takes those brief turns and it still dedicates to the tone that it has, but it takes those brief turns to remind you that there is a little bit more to it.
Yeah, a little bit,
not a lot, but enough. And it's, like I said, I think this movie succeeds far more than it fails. It's definitely some, and maybe it's time, maybe it's the benefit of what's to come. I don't know, but yeah, watching it back, I'm like, I don't really think, like, I would put this more at, like, I could buy like a 50%, like on Rotten Tomatoes or something. Like, that would make more sense to me. Like, kind of it being a split reaction, just because I'm not going to say this movie's perfect. And if there are criticisms of it that I'm sure are accurate, but by and large, I don't think it's not doing anything terribly offensive with the lore either. Doom has obviously changed around a lot. Like
I recognize that, as little as I know that he was pretty off, and they really, he's in the comics, he's from another country, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of his whole thing.
And this movie,
they really shoehorned it in with like that country sent him a mask. Like, I don't really know what they were going
for. Like it very much, and then like at the end of the movie, when, spoiler, Doom gets like turned into a statue, they ship him back to Latveria, and you're like, okay,
they're setting something up, I guess. Or
I think the sequel does imply that he's from there.
Okay.
Which, he's supposed to be, but his powers are obviously a little bit different too. Like, Doom has never like really had electric powers. That's never really been his bag. But Doom ends up being the most shifted one. But even then, like, I don't think it's going out of its way to like disrespect it. The only thing I can see people saying is that, Doom is like one of the most iconic Marvel villains. And so I could see people wanting a little bit more out of him. But by and large, like, I think this movie is, first and foremost, it's fun. Like, it's not like, I love things like The Dark Knight, but they are not necessarily optimistic viewings. They can be very cynical movies.
Popcorn movies.
They can be very, and that's not to say that it's bad, but obviously it's a very cynical, dark movie. With something like Fantastic Four, especially with kind of that wave that's to come, it's nice that, Fox was just kind of like, you know what, run with it. Like, it's a Fantastic Four movie. It's a movie not afraid to be a Fantastic Four movie.
I think one reason we like going back to this, because I love the MCU. I love where superhero movies are. I know we're spoiled with how many good movies that we're getting, but to a point, we almost know what to expect from a superhero movie these days. They've really fine-tuned the formula, if you will. And back then, we've got superhero movies, again, that aren't trying to build an interconnected universe. There's not a sky portal trying to save the world, huge stakes. It's just fun superhero movies,
right?
And it's kind of refreshing these days.
The script, it really is.
Going back to some more about the tone here and how much fun that they're having. The movie is not subtle with anything, especially its jokes. And I love all the teases to the team. They know that we as an audience know a lot about the Fantastic Four as far as what's going to happen to them and their powers. There's lines I wrote down here like, same old Reed, always stretching. It's not subtle. It's just fun. Reed, when he first sees the suits, he calls them fantastic.
Yeah.
He asked Ben.
I legit have in my notes. He said fantastic. Get it?
Yeah. He asked Ben, "How are you feeling?" And he says, "Solid." Before he turns into the thing.
It's just, and the thing is like, it's ridiculous, but at the same time, like, it doesn't feel out of place, really. Like,
you can either roll your eyes or you can, chuckle.
You just lean into it.
Yeah, my favorite one though, genuinely great. When Ben Grimm wakes up from his little mini coma, I guess, and it's from his point of view, and Johnny's in there, and he's like, "Oh, I don't know, don't look in the mirror. You don't want to look at yourself." And as an audience, you're like, oh, "Okay, here's the moment.
Here's the thing. Here's the moment."
Yeah, and he grabs the mirror, and he's fine. He's like, "Oh, he's just calling him ugly, basically. Oh, they did the best they can do, but you're still ugly."
That was a good moment because again, you, the audience, are assuming at this point, oh no, he's transformed.
Yes,
and that scene where he transforms is another moment where the movie kind of takes a turn because it really kind of almost leans into like that like Cronenberg-esque body horror type stuff.
A little bit, yeah.
You not heavy, obviously, but like you can definitely like he's normal, and then suddenly like he takes this drastic turn, and they avoid showing like the actual physical transformation because how would you even do that in a way that's not terrifying? But it's still this moment where like you can see, and like I like the way they used to sell it. Like obviously like he's in the bed and the bed breaks, and like obviously like they do those little subtle things with him rather than being like, let's just show a man turning into a giant rock monster. They let the stage set itself because you know what's happening to him. Yeah, you know what happens to this guy. So they don't feel the need to be like, let's try to work that in or try to have some awful CGI mix thing where we try to show him transforming. And it's
I would say the most obvious CG in this movie is Reed Richards stretching. Yeah. I don't know how else you can do that.
No.
And I don't know. Maybe it looks a little off, but it's serviceable. It's good enough, and there's really not another option they could have done.
I do think they get creative with it. Like you can see there's scenes where it's very much Reed's real face, but they're like CGIing like stuff around him.
Yes, yeah.
And I think they get creative with that. There's sequences
whenever
where, like,
he ties up the thing.
You can see that it's him behind him.
Exactly.
But they've got the CGI arms around him, and I think that stuff's fairly effective.
It works
because that way his face still looks very real. And I think the Reed thing only really gets a little wishy-washy when it's his skin. Like when he's wearing the suit, I think it mostly looks fine.
Yes.
But when they're trying to like show his skin stretching, that's when I think
it's hard to do. Reproduce something we know so well, like the look of a human being in our skin. That. It's hard to do.
But by and large, like again, like I think Johnny looks fine for the most part. I think they run with that a lot. And like I said, you can clearly tell that Evans is just having the time of his life.
He's having a good time. I love whenever he leaves the building, I think to go to the Supercross event.
Yeah.
And they've been in quarantine since they got back, but somehow his car has the license plate that says Torch.
Oh, yeah.
And at first
I was a moment where I was like, really?
But you know what? If this was a comic book, that's exactly what the artist would have done. They would have drawn in Torched or whatever.
Absolutely. It's one of those things where like I think it doesn't detract as much as it otherwise would because the movie's never really trying to be anything but what it is. And so it makes it a lot more to just makes it a lot easier to just kind of sit back and enjoy it.
I would say it was definitely, if not geared towards kids, at least assuming kids are going to be watching this.
It was very much a family movie. I would describe this as like a family movie. It was very much meant that like you could take all the kids on a Saturday afternoon and we can all go watch Fantastic Four.
My son is 6 months old right now, maybe too young to watch the movie. But hey, if he was 6 years old and he was like, "Hey, Dad, what can you tell me about the Fantastic Four?" Watch this movie. Yeah, I think you get it.
I think so. I think that's and like I said, I think that's definitely part of its success. I definitely think that contributed to it because it was something where like, I don't know if Daredevil necessarily would have been as accessible for kids. And I certainly know stuff like The Punisher wasn't. But to have, a superhero movie akin to Spider-Man, say, come out and kind of be like, all right, this is another one of those, another one that we can take the whole family to. And I definitely think that's part of its success. Like I said, this movie makes over $300 million, which like I said, nowadays feels like chump change. But
speaking of Spider-Man, I don't know why Spider-Man was received so well and this one so poorly. And I'm not going to say it's as good or better than Spider-Man, but I think they're in the same ballpark. In my opinion,
I haven't revisited those Sam Raimi Spider-Mans in some time. I'm actually looking forward to. I don't know if we're ever going to get to those on this show, just because the reception.
We're going to at least talk about one of them.
We'll at least talk about one of them, yeah. So it may be that I watch all three of them in preparation for that. But I actually am looking forward to Spider-Man 3 because I think I am going to find a lot to enjoy about that. But it's interesting to see kind of. You're right, though, in a way, because like I don't think this movie, like, not trying to be negative about it. I think what this movie honestly gets dinged for is there's nothing about it that necessarily like sticks with you. Like, yeah. I think I will obviously remember things like Chris Evans and Michael Chiklis and some of those scenes going forward. But like, I could very much at the time understand the criticism that like it was very disposable. Like it was very much popcorn entertainment. It's a summer
movie in every sense of the term.
It's not trying to be The Dark Knight. It's not trying to even be Iron Man. It was a movie that seems generally aware of what it was. Sure. And I think if you just lean into that, you can have a really good time with it. And I'm not even saying that like you need to turn your brain off or anything. I'm saying like just see the movie, like just enjoy it as it happens.
Just have fun, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think you really need to like do that.
That final fight with Doom. Again, they're all learning to work together, use their powers, take out the bad guy. That work for you?
By and large, it did. The CGI there gets a little heavy, and I don't necessarily know if the technology was completely there to make that look kind of better than the warbly mess that it kind of was. But that moment where like Doom thinks he's got him, and then Ben lands in, and then Johnny lands in, and they're actually all together. That moment is very cool. I think that showing that they're all here, they're all united. Because this movie does seed a lot of tension between the different members. Like obviously Reed and Sue just being formerly romantically involved in all of this. There's obviously tension there. Johnny and Ben have their tension because Johnny likes to pester Ben about his condition. Sue and Johnny obviously have their issues being siblings. And then Reed is obviously so overwhelmed at times with trying to fix Ben that he just starts like falling apart. And so to have that united front at the end, I like it. I think that moment lands where it's like, I buy that this is a team that's all on the same page.
And there's growth from the bridge to this scene, because on the bridge, they all have their part to play and they're successful. But I think the biggest difference is now Reed Richards has learned to become assertive, learned to become the leader, and he's calling out the action. Hey, you do this, you do this.
Well, and Ben, they're also generally in this scene versus the bridge, they're working together. On the bridge, they're kind of all isolated in what they're doing. Like they're all doing very individual, specific things that contribute to the rescue. This is very much a Johnny, you do this while Sue does this, and Ben and Reed do. Like it was very much a
united,
team.
Like you said.
It was a team.
Sure.
It was very much all of them not just working together, but specifically using their powers to do something to contribute to the victory. The victory itself is kind of weird. The whole like we superheated Doom up and then we froze him in place. Like it's very strange, but that moment of like them all being a team works. So yeah, like I said, I watched it last night, and when it finished, I was like a perfectly good movie.
What was everybody so mad about?
Maybe The Incredibles spoiled everybody. Who knows? But
sure. Well, let's talk about this movie as an adaptation. I think we kind of established Doom, probably the biggest departure, kind of mixing up his origin, his powers a little bit. But overall, do you think it captures the spirit of the Fantastic Four from the comic books?
Absolutely. What I think is interesting is the beginning of this movie establishes that Reed is like already kind of a notable scientist. He's just out of money.
Yeah, I guess by being a morally upright guy, he's not able to.
Yeah, they kind of imply that
kind of what they're talking about.
Or like it's kind of like implied that like, he never. The Sue Reed thing is kind of seeded about Reed kind of never following through. He kind of only hits nails in halfway. And so I think it's just kind of playing off of that lack of assertiveness that he has.
Right.
So we do get the implication that Doom and Reed and Sue and Ben go way back. They do imply that. I think the idea is Doom and Reed were rivals in high school. And obviously everybody in this movie is seemingly 30s or beyond.
They have a history. Yeah.
There's a history. I like, generally speaking, that the history is more implied than outright stated. Again, it's kind of
there's not a big flashback scene.
Right. There's no flashbacks in this movie, I don't think.
Yeah. No, I don't think so.
And so I like that. And because it's just trusting the audience to kind of you show, hey, we're all friends, we all used to work together, or we all used to know each other, and there was all this falling out, and it works for the most part, I think.
Yeah, something I didn't mention at the top, but one of my favorite things about this movie, it sounds like a backwards compliment, but is the runtime. It's an hour and 40 minutes. It's hour 40.
In like and
a
out.
Standard movie. It's not quite the 90-minute in and out, but it's not the 2 hours. If we did add more backstory, more flashbacks, and bloat this thing to 2 hours, it would be a bit of a drag, and it keeps the pace moving, and I really appreciate that.
Well, and I think that you would have just added time to the origin. I feel like you would have just tacked that time on at the beginning. And I think, again, just shotgunning us to space. Like, we get it. They're the Fantastic Four.
Yeah,
they're going to end up in a situation where they get their powers. I think trying to be like, oh, let's spend an hour setting that up is just the wrong decision. I think it's one of those things where you're just going to lose. You're just going to kill the pace, I think.
Not a lot that I would really change about this movie. It does have what I'm going to refer to as a yellow spandex moment. There's the moment that seemingly every superhero movie has, where they talk about how dumb it is. I think
I know what it is too. Yeah.
Classically, in X-Men, what would you prefer? Yellow spandex?
Yeah.
Don't those suits look stupid? No, your black leather looks stupid, but that's not this movie. So the first
You're not
time,
in the Matrix, buddy.
The first time we see their blue suits that are obviously going to become the super suits, they look good, but the thing has to say, I don't know if I should be doing Swan Lake in these things.
Yeah. There's a moment. That's actually not the moment I thought. There's a moment later when Johnny has like the toys, and the Thing toy says it's clobbering time, and Ben, I think, says something like, that's stupid, and just smashes it. And I'm like, come on.
Which sucks, because whenever he does say it lands, it works. Yeah. It's fun whenever he gets the drop.
And it might be that in that moment they're just playing that he's more upset than anything. But no, that moment there doing Swan Lake, like, I'm curious if, like, because I feel like we get a moment like that in almost every movie where like
it feels like it,
especially in these mid 2000s ones. But even like you said, it still happens it happened in Infinity War. So I'm curious if all of them might have a moment like that where
that's going to be a running thing. I think I'm going to keep an eye out for those in these movies.
Does Green Lantern have one? Green Lantern kind of has one.
He proposed?
He does. Yeah, well,
that's the line.
That's the line. Yeah, okay, that's the line.
How stupid is it's a magical ring? Yeah, all right.
Well, no, I thought you were jumping back to this because Reed does that at the end of the movie.
Oh, right. You know what gag? There's a visual gag I like there where he gets down on one knee, but it cuts back to their.
And he's still her height.
Yeah, that was really fun.
And see, that's the stuff where it's like they're little things, but they sell that these powers are just becoming part of who they are.
Yeah,
and I think that's an understated thing, because like I said, Johnny with the popcorn, Reed doing that, even like, because like they show them doing like normal things, like Reed like uses his stretch arm to reach across the hallway to get more toilet paper at one point.
Because you would do that if you
if I absolutely would. There's apparently a cut scene. I haven't looked it up, but there's one where apparently Reed makes his face look like Hugh Jackman.
I read about that. As far as I can tell, that's just on a DVD extended edition.
I don't know how it is, but apparently the closest we got to that X-Men Fantastic Four crossover. Because I think this movie is, like, by and large, is an adaptation. Obviously, we're keeping it limited to the Fantastic Four and Doom. We have a couple of other characters that show up. Willie Lumpkin, who Stan Lee plays, actually is a character from the history. It's actually one of the few times I think he actually plays someone versus just kind of appearing. Kerry Washington, I think, shows up as Alicia Masters right at the end.
Yeah, that was cool.
And so she, I think, comes back in the sequel. So
she's in the bar. She's plays an important part
at the end, and I think she's part of what helps Ben. I think the resolution arc of Ben does get a little rushed, but she's part of that resolution of him kind of accepting that this is how I am. But it's that moment, I mentioned this earlier, but that moment where Ben gets turned back to normal and he realizes Doom did it on purpose, that realization, I think Chiklis sells it really well as far as realizing that he's been played. Like, Doom gave him the thing that he wanted just so that now Doom can do something terrible. Right. And I think that's good. But we avoid a lot of the other motions. We avoid a lot of the other pitfalls of like Green Lantern falls into that pitfall of like dropping all these clues of things that are going to come. I don't think this movie really does that.
Trying to do anything.
No, not at all. Like there's no
a sequel.
There's no hints of Galactus. There's no hints of the Silver Surfer. There's no hints of Mole Man. There's no hints of anybody.
No.
And I generally like that because by and large, I feel like those things tend to just get in the way as far as like making it feel like you're just trying to jump ahead. This movie really does just feel like Fantastic Four movie about the Fantastic Four that's just about establishing the Fantastic Four. And not even really in necessarily an origin sense, but sense of like, we're going to establish them as a team. And I think it works. I think like I said, I think it succeeds far more than it fails.
Yeah. I would show someone this movie to explain the powers and dynamics and characters of the Fantastic Four. Yes, definitely. So I'm excited to watch the sequel now. Probably won't be.
I do remember the sequel. I do remember the sequel a little bit more, and I'm less optimistic. But,
okay, well, we'll save that talk for another time, but I think that's going to do it for us. Thank you to Mark Benavides of Rogues Among Us for singing our theme song. Follow at NotThatMarkAnthony on Instagram. If you like the show, please tell a friend, rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help. And follow us on Twitter at BOTRcast. Thank you.